Alberta offers many different fishing experiences. With over 20 species of game fish inhabiting our waters, you never know what might bite the end of your line. Regulations for catch and size limits are in place to conserve at-risk fish populations, like Alberta's native trout species. Knowing how to identify fish is an essential skill to have as an angler. To ensure you are following provincial sport fishing regulations, identifying a fish is as simple as looking for 3 key characteristics. Remember that all of these can be observed while keeping your fish in the water. First, fins. Look at the location, shape, coloration, and markings of the fins. Only trout and char species have an adipose fin, an extra fin on the back between the dorsal fin and the tail. Next, body spots. Look at the size, distribution, and color of spots on the back and sides. Trout have dark spots and char have light spots. Finally, the jaw. Look at the mouth shape and any markings around the jaw. There can be a lot of variation within a species depending on the fish's diet and the time of year. There is also variation between species. Bull trout and brook trout are easily confused. They are both char species, with white leading edges on the pectoral and pelvic fins. Bull trout have white spots on the body and do not have any black markings on the dorsal fin. No black, put it back, is an easy way to avoid harvesting a bull trout by mistake. West Slope cutthroat trout and rainbow trout are true trout with black spots on the body and dorsal fin. West Slope cutthroat trout and rainbow trout are often confused for one another. West Slope cutthroat trout are named for a characteristic red slash marking under the jaw, which differentiates them from their closely related rainbow trout. Rainbow trout may or may not feature a red stripe down the side of the body, but they typically have even spotting patterns along the back. West Slope cutthroat trout spotting patterns are sparse towards the head. Athabasca rainbow trout and non-native rainbow trout have similar features. However, Athabasca rainbow trout are only found within the upper Athabasca River and its tributaries. If you catch a rainbow trout here, it's best to release it. Fish identification takes practice, so remember, if you don't know, let it go. By releasing unknown species, you will be doing your part to reduce the accidental harvest of native trout species. Thank you for helping maintain Alberta's fisheries for generations to come. To learn more, visit mywildalberta.ca.
This stream, Sylvester in particular, one of the reasons that it was also an area of concern is that there's the West Slope cutthroat trout that actually live in this stream. So it kind of makes it a little bit higher priority because West Slope cutthroat trout have so few areas left. Like the eastern slopes is kind of the last refuge for a lot of trout species in general. So here we have a bunch of willow stakes, and by planting the willow stakes, we're helping enhance the vegetation, so getting those roots in the ground so that they can start to filter again and start to store water again. Roots will act like fingers and they can kind of hold all of that soil together on the bank and prevent slumping. So riparian areas are really important for fish habitat. They provide several different functions that benefit fish. Usually diverse levels of vegetation, so you got tall willows, you have smaller shrubs like sedges and rushes, so it's diversity of habitat. Having that tall vegetation provides shading over the creek, which can help cool the creek. It also, all that vegetation slows down the water running across the landscape, and so that all of that, any contaminants, sediments, things like that can filter out before the water actually gets into the creek. So filtering is a really important part. This Sylvester Creek here eventually flows into the Elbow, which then flows into the Bow, and that provides drinking water for the city of Calgary and everywhere downstream.
Good evening. I'll just do a check here to make sure that you can actually hear me. Norine, can you confirm or deny this?
We can hear you, Amy.
Thank you, Marina. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to the third session of the Native Trout Workshop. My name is Amy McLeod. I am the Eastern Slopes Program Coordinator and Provincial Riparian Specialist for Cows and Fish, and I am also your MC for the evening. Tonight, I am joining you from Mohkinstsis, Calgary, Alberta, and I honor and acknowledge that I live, work, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, as well as the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Métis Nation of Alberta. There are many others joining from other traditional territories across Alberta. So I would also like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of Treaty 4, 6, 8, and 10, and of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands since time immemorial. That long relationship between Indigenous people and the land includes a deep knowledge and respect for the living and non-living entities that create this amazing place that we call home. If you are tuning in from somewhere outside Alberta, please take a moment to acknowledge the territory that you are on. A few technical things before we get started. We will have 5 presentations tonight, after which point we will take questions. So if you have a question for any one of our presenters, please pop it in the Q&A box, and those will be addressed at the end of the session. To ensure that we have enough time to address the questions, please try to limit your questions to the topics that the speakers were speaking on. You can also use the chat function to leave any comments, but we do ask that you remain respectful in your comments. To change your view, you can go to the top of your screen where it says screen view. I recommend viewing in full screen. And at any point, if you, for example, would like to see more of the beautiful bull trout on the screen versus my floating head, or somebody else's floating head, you can reduce the size of the head featured and see more of the pictured. And you can do that by sliding across the vertical bar on the screen. And so before we continue on, I'm going to ask my wonderful helper to launch our first poll. I'm curious to see who is joining us here this evening. So as soon as that poll pops up, please answer what best describes your role here today. And we'll finish up that poll. Thank you for filling that out. It looks like we have 38% of attendees as anglers, which is excellent to see, and about 30% non-government conservation organizations, and then a little smattering of other folks on the call. Thank you so much for obliging me with that. And as I mentioned, this is the third session in the series of 4. The fourth and final session will be next Tuesday, March 15th, which will be a full day session aimed more at some of the technical aspects of native trout recovery. So we encourage any practitioners, professionals, or those just keen to learn more about the ongoing research and to connect with other people working on research to attend that session. And while we do hope that you've been able to join us live for all of these sessions, I would like you to know that if you have registered for any one of the sessions, you will have access to the recorded content until the end of the month. And you should get an email tomorrow with the links for all 3 first session recordings. The Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society, otherwise known as Cows and Fish, and typically how we introduce ourselves. We are a not-for-profit that empowers people who live, work, and play in Alberta to take care of riparian areas, those areas that connect land and water. And I often do get asked about what cows have to do with fish. And for me, that answer comes in understanding relationships. And in this case, it's the relationship between cattle and their impact on the landscape and how that impacts fish and more broadly, the water. But it isn't just the relationship between cows and fish. There are many different human activities that impact our land and as a result, impact our water. Fish aren't just a product of the water, they're a product of the entire watershed, which includes the land and us. And no matter where you are on the landscape, you are a part of a watershed. And so all activities will add up to impact the health of the watershed, the health of the fish in that watershed, and the health of the people in the watershed. Cows and Fish as an organization moves past the polarization and recognizes that as we are all connected by water, we need to work together to find solutions that benefit all. And it isn't just about livestock management. With appropriate management and care of many different activities, I believe we can have productive and profitable landscapes that don't cause our watersheds to unravel, negatively impacting our finned kin. So riparian areas, those green threads along the water's edge, sew the land and water together. And they rely on plants to hold the soil and banks together, protecting the land from the erosive power of water, but also filtering runoff. Healthy riparian areas are critical for providing the clean, clear, cool, complex, and connected waterways that native trout require. And Alberta's native trout and their habitats in the beautiful Rocky Mountains are a part of what makes Alberta such a special place, and they're also a part of our heritage. These fish, once abundant in Alberta, are all listed provincially as threatened and are now confined to these headwater streams where this is their last stronghold. Not only are native trout our neighbors, but they're also indicators of the water they live in and the land that surrounds that water. So if we look to native trout species to gauge our impact on the land and water, what might they tell us? Would they say we've been good stewards of this shared space? With cumulative land use pressures such as industry, forestry, grazing, recreation, population growth, and angling, to name a few, it can be overwhelming to know where to focus our recovery efforts. And there's no smoking gun, so to speak, when it comes to aquatic diversity decline. But one thing we can say for sure is that there is decline. And so recognizing the challenges presented with native trout recovery and the need to work together, Cows and Fish became part of the Native Trout Collaborative. Initiated by Alberta Environment Parks in 2019, guided by their species at risk recovery plans, and funded through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, organizations working on different aspects of native trout recovery came together to coordinate, prioritize, and leverage resources. Our work maintaining and enhancing riparian habitat is part of that, but there are other ways to help native fish. The collaborative just launched a new website, which you'll see here on the screen, and this acts as a hub to educate about the program, as well as steer different audiences to available resources. I encourage you to check it out, and Nicole will be talking a little bit more about that later. This native trout workshop you're attending right now is part of our ongoing commitment to support native trout recovery, and we are happy to announce that this is the 11th annual workshop we have hosted. So thank you to all of you who have supported this work along the way. Together, our actions make a difference. And before we move on with tonight's program, I want to take a moment to reflect on the current state of the world. It can be overwhelming to witness, experience, take in all the injustices of the moment. The good news is that they are all connected. So if your little corner of work involves pulling at one of those threads, you're helping to unravel the whole damn cloth. And I don't want to dismiss one of our presenters here, Cal Hill, and any of his efforts in any way, but I do also want to take a moment to acknowledge International Women's Day and say that I'm totally honored to be introducing a session featuring so many amazing women working on native trout recovery in Alberta. Breaking the bias is also another way to pull on those threads. And now I have the privilege to introduce Marina Krainer. I have been able to work Marina Krainer for the past few years on the Ghost Watershed. Born in Austria, Marina spent as much time as she could outdoors from an early age. She moved to Alberta in 2002, and with her passion for the natural environment, became involved with the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society, GWAS we call it, joining the board of directors as a volunteer. Since 2009, Marina has been the executive director of GWAS and is still an active volunteer in her community. She enjoys spending her leisure time outdoors, hiking, horseback riding, as well as observing the local flora and fauna. While she has a keen interest in natural sciences, continuously improving her knowledge through training and research, Marina believes that feeling connected to nature is crucial in order to preserve our environment. Through her work, she has led many walks and hikes in the Ghost Watershed and is engaging people in restoration processes. And I would invite you now, Marina, to take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a great turnout tonight, and I'd like to just tell you a little bit about bioengineering and especially the rough and loose technique tonight, and then I'm going to show you a video right after my presentation. So who is the Ghost Watershed Alliance? We are a watershed stewardship group. We were established in 2002, and we are largely volunteer driven. We have 2 people working for us as contractors. And other than that, we have a very, very active board of directors who all volunteer a lot of their time. So what does the Ghost Watershed Alliance do? We do gather and share knowledge, we raise awareness, we work collaboratively to improve watershed health. Those are really the cornerstones of the work that GWAS does. And here on the bottom, you can see quite a few members of the Calgary ATV Riders Association, as well as Elliot Lindsay from Trout Unlimited Canada, helping us with the bioengineering field day. So what is soil bioengineering? It uses living plant materials to perform an engineering function, as Dave Polster puts it. Dave Polster has a 40-year career in bioengineering and developed a lot of the techniques that we are talking about. So why do we do undertake bioengineering? Well, it controls erosion, it prevents channeling of runoff, like you can see here on the photo on the right. This is actually the Highway 40 Forestry Trunk Road. And you can see a lot of runoff after a rainfall event, and that runoff used to end up right in the creek. It prevents excessive amounts of sediment from ending up in the streams. And I think that's very important to note at this point, because not all sediment is bad, but once it becomes too much, it can cause problems for aquatic ecosystems. And it also helps to reestablish riparian vegetation to do bioengineering. So what is the rough and loose technique? It's a bioengineering technique developed by Dave Polster to treat disturbed sites. You can see some of the rough and loose technique here at the bottom being applied. So you use an excavator for that, and it might look a little wild when it is done, but there's really an art to it, to not overdo it, not make the holes too deep. And the idea really is to decompact compacted soils, and that everything that you touch with the excavator at the end of the day is decompacted. So that means you don't just make holes and mounds, but you also loosen up the soil in between. That's really important. A lot of the time that takes quite a bit of experience by the operator of the excavator. And it doesn't always turn out, but quite a few operators here in Alberta have mastered the skill by now. So it may look quite shocking at first glance, but you see here a photo of the site in 2020. And this is exactly the same site only 1 year later. As you can see, it gives a lot of plants a chance to grow. And here in this case, what we see is a lot of balsam poplar, which we did not even plant. Its seeds came in on their own, carried by wind, and established themselves quite quickly. This is the growth of just 1 single year. And on the right, you also see one of the willows that we planted growing. So the benefits of the rough and loose technique are that it prevents overland flow. So when you have a rain event or a thunderstorm coming through, that it prevents water from just running on top of the surface and ending up straight in the stream, picking up quite a bit of sediment on the way. It promotes infiltration. As you can see on the right-hand side here in the photo, these holes fill up with water. So instead of the water just running off, it stays in those holes, it captures the sediment and lets the water trickle slowly into the ground. It prevents erosion, even though that might be counterintuitive, and it provides diverse habitat. The holes have a lot of moisture, and the tops of those mounds are more drier sites for different types of plants. So it helps to reestablish riparian vegetation, and it helps to improve water quality. As you can see here on the photos on the bottom, there's a site in 2019 and a lot of surface runoff. And this is the same site on the right side 1 year later, with a lot of the willows having started to grow, as well as other pioneering species filling in between. It really promotes collaboration between different groups. We've had a lot of ATV user groups take part in our workshops, as you see here on the photo on the bottom, the Calgary ATV Riders Association. It is an opportunity to share knowledge and perspectives between the different people and that come from different walks of life and see the world a little bit different than we probably do. And that's so important to exchange those thoughts. And bioengineering workshops also improve watershed health and fish habitat, kind of as a side effect. And the most important thing, at the end of the day, everybody has a smile on their face. So with no further ado, I'd like to show you our video on bioengineering. So I'm just going to switch here to the video. Okay, so I hope you can all see that.
Everybody tends to think of streams and rivers as that little blue line that runs through the valley, but really the water is coming from the entire landscape. Water originates on these hillsides, in these valleys, percolates down into the groundwater, and then feeds back into our streams and rivers.
Water is really critical. All of the species, like we all need water, right? Fish, animals, plants, birds, humans. Like we're in the Waiparis and the Ghost Watershed here today, doing some habitat restoration to some nearby stream that's been damaged by human development and use. So we're trying to restore these areas for the future.
This is a two-day bioengineering workshop that consists of a classroom session for a full day as well as a field restoration day out in the Ghost Watershed. And the nice thing is that it has really helped us bring together a very diverse group of people. We've had First Nations people here, we've had a lot of environmental consultants, we've had professionals here, as well as recreational users, both motorized and non-motorized recreational users join us for these workshops because they want to learn how they can do their part to keep the source watershed intact.
Looking at the future that climate change has to bring and recognizing how valuable an area like the Ghost Watershed is, we need to start thinking about water management from the whole landscape perspective.
There's all sorts of activities happening on this landscape. So there's cattle grazing out here, there's forestry happening, there's lots of recreational activities happening on the landscape as well. Those activities result in trails and roads, and whenever they cross a stream, that is one more point source for sediment and other contaminants to enter the water. The West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout numbers have declined significantly over the last 100 to 150 years, and their distribution has also contracted. So they're not found in a lot of the streams and rivers where they used to be found. Watersheds that are most intact are going to be the areas where those native trout species have the best chance of persisting. And watersheds that are most intact are also best capable of providing that clean water, which is the source of drinking water for Calgary and all the way across the prairies. So the native trout are an indicator of watershed integrity.
So this is a small tributary to Vipers Creek. It's critical habitat for West Slope cutthroat trout. It's also a designated trail. There was a bridge on the site here before, but it was too narrow for some of the ATVs that are being used nowadays. And so people found a ford upstream of the bridge. And of course, we want to try to keep motorized vehicles out of the creek so that we don't have too much sediment coming down from the sides into the creek and impacting fish habitat by closing up those clean spaces between rocks to spawn, as well as for the invertebrates, their food, to thrive. A couple of years ago, we worked with Trout Unlimited Canada and Alberta Environment Parks, and they put this new bridge in place that is now wide enough for the side-by-sides and rerouted the trail a little bit away from the creek. So how we use bioengineering in such a site is that where we have eroded stream banks, we stabilize those stream banks by planting willows again. So that way we still have the recreational opportunity and at the same time have improved fish habitat. These are really nice willows, so we should definitely...
Bioengineering is the use of living plant materials to perform some engineering function. Very inexpensive. We didn't need to import any material. The materials were collected right on the site. Willows that we're using, and they're pioneering species, we use those species to start the process of recovery. Pioneering species have evolved over millions of years to start the process of ecosystem recovery. What you see in the rough and loose is that it's pioneering species that come in.
Here you can see the rough and loose technique developed by Dave Polster. It decompacts the soil, so that way you can have plants reestablish itself. Quite a bit of this rough and loose technique has been used in the eastern slopes over the past few years, and we've heard from a lot of people that it looks very destructive. It looks almost like a moonscape, and they figured that this is doing much more damage than recreational use can do. And really what we have seen today, and in examples that Dave has given over the past 20-25 years, is that rough and loose actually enhances the ecosystem. It gives plants a chance to get a foothold. And it just takes a few years until you really see the big difference. When we did the rough and loose technique a couple of years ago, it immediately stopped the sediment coming from the road from ending up in the creek. It stopped it right there. It was like little pools that collected the water. And if you look at it now, 2 years later, you can see that there is an abundance of plants growing there already. So all of that erosion is essentially stopped within a couple of years.
The rough and loose does two things. One is it prevents the access. The other thing that happens is that it creates habitat for a whole diversity of species to come in. The holes will fill up with water. The mounds will soak up moisture, and the whole thing will be revegetated. You're basically creating conditions that foster the establishment of the pioneering species.
So I've confirmed these are willows by the leaf structure and kind of the form of the plant. I'm also looking to make sure that I can get at least 1.20 meters to 1.5 meters thumb thick, Dave Polster's rule of thumb. So now I'm just pruning off any of the stuff that's smaller than my pinky or my thumb. Once this is planted in the ground, so let's say we plant it that deep, all this kind of live tissue will be in contact with soil and moisture, and it'll, instead of sending up shoots, it'll send out roots. And so the deeper it is, the more chance the pole, the live stake, will have to access water and soil.
There's been lots of examples of major cities, whether it's New York or others, that are looking into putting a lot more investment of their upfront water treatment costs into watershed stewardship. Certainly this is one of the major source watersheds for the city of Calgary. You know, trying to reduce erosion on the landscapes, trying to mitigate compaction, trying to look at how we build trails on these landscapes and which trails are sustainable and which ones aren't, and restoring those ones that aren't, ultimately is going to have benefits to the city of Calgary and their water supply and the water treatment costs, because you're trying to stop that erosion at the source.
I love being in nature. It brings a peace of mind. It's just a happy place, so to speak, for me. It always has been. Me, as a 4x4, I stick to the trails. I go where I'm allowed. That's when I see the damage being done. It's so nice to be able to bring it back. And I just love looking at a pristine nature. And so that's our goal, just to bring it back so she can help herself, so to speak. We just kick-started.
We are hoping to do at least one restoration site every year with volunteers. We are sharing knowledge and sharing experiences and perspectives as well. Empowering people to do their part in the watershed would not be possible without all these organizations working together.
Thank you so much for watching.
Oops, I'm muted. Thank you for that, Marina. You're doing incredible work, as are all the people supporting you in that. I would now like to move on to our next presenter, and it is also a privilege to introduce Norine Ambrose, my boss and the amazing leader of our organization. In her nearly 23 years with Cows and Fish, Norine has focused on working with landowners, communities, and natural resource professionals to help them recognize the value of riparian areas and what they can do to maintain these areas as healthy, productive pieces of our landscape. Her work with community leaders, organizations, and agencies emphasizes sharing lessons learned in effective program design and delivery. She combines wetland ecology research with her farm upbringing to help bridge science and education. She believes strongly that those who manage and use the land are critical to ensuring a healthy landscape. She also holds a diploma in renewable resources from NATE and a Bachelor of Science with specialization in zoology related to wildlife conservation from the University of Alberta. I will let you take it away, Norine.
Thanks, Amy. I should have told you just to read like one sentence.
Norine, you get
yeah,
all of the celebration.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amy, very much. Appreciate that and the opportunity to talk to everybody joining us tonight. So we are called as an organization Cows and Fish, which Amy already introduced to you. And so my task tonight is to help talk a little bit more about the cow side than the fish side, sharing some of the experiences we have had working with the ranching and agricultural community, and kind of give you some examples of some of the ways that those folks are benefiting riparian areas. So I'll help you hopefully see a little bit more about how cows and fish can coexist. So Amy talked about what we do kind of in her introduction, and just to kind of reiterate, what we're about is really about providing awareness and education, that sort of working with other people, so collaborating and team building, providing options or alternatives, like what's in the realm of the possible. In this case, for grazing management, that's kind of tools. Marina talked about restoration tools. I'm going to talk about grazing. Community-based actions is getting communities to work together to take action, in this case on, say, fish, on riparian health and improving our watersheds, and monitoring, of course, is both ecological, but also monitoring the kind of work we do in terms of social sciences and effectiveness. And really, riparian areas, like Amy alluded to at the beginning, are really just a door opening exercise to bring people together to talk about land and water management, land and water challenges and issues, but also solutions. And so I hope that that's what I'll share with some of you tonight. If my slides want to proceed. There we go. So there are lots of challenges out there. There are lots of things that are affecting our landscape, and all of them can have negative consequences to the health of our landscapes, to water quality, to fish, to ecosystem health and integrity. But they can also be managed in many cases in ways that minimize or prevent those harms or risks. And so I'm going to talk about some practical examples from a grazing perspective, but I will sort of throw in some other kinds of land uses to just sort of provide the context, because based on who said they were attending at the beginning, not that many of you are agricultural producers. This is more to help us understand each other, as well as if you are on the call and you have livestock, to hopefully give you some useful information as well. And it was really important to recognize that what we do on the land as humans affects the ability of that land to be healthy and function in the riparian area, in the water, and everywhere else. And so regardless of what kind of land use it is. So I've used the word riparian a bunch of times, and I think you've heard it a couple of times already, but just so we're all on the same page, a riparian area is that area next to a water body. It's the stream bank, the floodplain, the shoreline. It's that area with an elevated water table where the roots are tapped into it, so they like to keep their feet wet, and you have extra moisture more than would fall on the landscape. And it's not really the aquatic, it's not the channel itself or the body of water. It's the sort of that transition zone where it's wetter than dry but drier than wet. And if you're in a riparian area and you see them, they can do a lot of things. If they're healthy and functioning, they can trap and store sediment. They can recharge aquifers by slowing down the water. The picture you see in the top right is good mud. It's the trapped material that's been taken out of floodwaters or overland flow that rebuilds banks and keeps that soil that Marina talked about out of the water body, which isn't great for fish or water quality. So when we talk about grazing management, we're typically talking about really 4 key principles that are helpful to manage grazing management. That's balance, distribution, timing, and rest. And I'll talk a little bit more about those. But the really great thing about that is, though managing those 4 grazing principles is completely relevant to fish. It means that what's good for the landscape from a grazing perspective is also going to be good for fish, because you're going to provide the things that fish need, which is reducing sediment, providing cover and shade and structure for their habitat needs, and of course ensuring there's water, because fish do obviously need water as well. And those principles could be applied to all kinds of land uses. It's not just livestock, but they're really a surrogate for all kinds of land uses. And really a big part of that is maintaining plants and reducing erosion, because those things aren't great for fish when they happen. If you don't have vegetation, you aren't slowing down the soil, like Marina talked about. So starting at the beginning, what are those 4 principles about? It's balancing forage production with supply, or in another way of looking at it, it's balancing how much you take or use with what's available and what can be produced and sustained year after year. And that's true whether your livestock are eating it, or if it's being mowed in a lawn or being trampled due to recreation. Those same things are going to apply. Distribute that use evenly, or at least in a planned way, because our favorite spots tend to get used more heavily. We want to avoid being places with our livestock when it's extra sensitive. So typically that's in wet times, so in the spring, but also at other times when that sensitivity is greater. And avoiding or providing adequate rest after use, so plants can regrow. And that, again, whether that's from grazing or other activities, providing rest is really critical. So a lot of the common things you might think about are providing an off-site watering system, like this one picture shows, providing ways for livestock, just like vehicles Marina talked about, to cross the creek, as you see in a couple examples here. Maybe using fencing to redistribute or keep cattle out of riparian areas. So I want to talk about a few examples that we've been involved in with partners. Some of these we've been really involved in the management changes and helping make them happen. Others are more just examples to share that maybe we didn't help get the management change on the ground, but we've done riparian health monitoring at these sites to help with part of the partnerships. So this is a site on Jumping Pound Creek, and basically a couple years ago, the Jumping Pound Creek Watershed Partnership, working with a Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program grant, helped do some fencing. And they created basically an exclusion zone next to the stream bank, and also a riparian pasture, so further back, allowing grazing and providing off-site watering, again, to give that rest near the water to maintain water quality. The Jumping Pound Creek is home to bull trout, and also in some portions has cutthroat. So really important places for fish, as well as other reasons. It is upstream of Calgary, so it's important for drinking water downstream for many, many people. The other interesting spot is this is a really popular fishing area, and so the ranchers had noticed that there was constantly challenges with fence maintenance, actually due to anglers climbing over the fences or leaving gates open, those kinds of things. And so they actually put an angler passage, one of those little V-shaped kind of gates that humans can get through but the cows cannot, to reduce those kinds of challenges. Better for the people fishing, but also better for the fence maintenance. And at this same area, one of the things that you saw there was mostly just grass. There was a lot of trees close to the stream bank. There was some riprap, big rocks that were nearby on a road that went partway along the stream bank, and not a lot of natural vegetation except for grass. And so the deep binding roots of trees and shrubs were kind of missing. And you can see in this picture where there's erosion happening in a winter shot. And so the group and the landowners did a project. This was during COVID. We were supposed to be there, but unfortunately weren't allowed to be because of COVID restrictions. But the bioengineering that Marina talked about included live staking at this site with willows, as well as what's called a live smile. So it's basically creating a small filtration barrier of woven live material held in place to trap some of that sediment and runoff. And that's just one example of a site getting started on some of these changes that are relatively new. Many years ago, one of the first projects that Cows and Fish was involved in was working with grazing management along Callum Creek, and comparing the picture on the left in what was at that time a holding field, so got a lot of use, to another site where deferred rotation was implemented, meaning avoiding that spring use, giving it that extra time in the spring, and rotating between pastures. That's just one rotational strategy. There are many others, but the idea being is that you think about all of those principles, but particularly the sensitivity of timing and early season use being harder on woody plants and harder on the soils because they are compactable when they're soft. These kinds of changes don't always finish, after one management, right? These are often evolving, and I'll talk some more about some of that evolution. These project sites are some that we've recently been involved with numerous partners, particularly with Alternative Land Use Services, Mountain View County, and of course the ranchers. I'm not providing ranchers' names because we have told, we are allowed to share their project, but we aren't sharing their names. This is a fencing situation where basically you can see the hatch marking along the stream is already excluded, and they wanted to exclude some more area from grazing for multiple years at a time. So creating long-term rest periods between grazing, so 3 or 4 years of rest between use, and also that means really controlled use because these fences are going to allow that opportunity to be there. And of course they're going to have off-site watering systems that can go along with that. At this site, there was a bunch of tree planting. There was also willow planting on some of the outside eroding beds. So often grazing management changes might be incorporating, some restoration techniques as well. At this site, the landowners were also working with the county and Alternative Land Use Services and the Alberta Conservation Association and ourselves. And you can see in this picture, these yellow lines are basically where watering systems are placed in the upland, so in the more dry area away from the stream, and to direct cattle to those places so they don't need to go to the stream to drink. But the creek in this case is not fenced out, except at the ends where you see those marks with the green and the pinky lines around the stream. So there was some additional fencing added to keep the cattle out of those areas, but moving water elsewhere is a really great distribution technique because it's the number one thing that is going to attract cattle. They do need to drink obviously every day, and so creating a watering system just encourages them to spend less time near the creek in the whole pasture. So really key partnerships in these opportunities to make these work. The Northern Lights Fly Fishers group has also been involved in these projects. And like the last one, the same partners were involved here. This was an old project from the 1980s, originally a Buck for Wildlife project, where streambank fencing was done to benefit habitat and protect fish habitat in particular. And one of the things that had happened since that time is a recognition that fences really close to the stream are hard to maintain. They do eventually need replaced because fences need maintenance. And so This project was about repairing fences, replacing it, and particularly moving it further back. So whereas in the 80s it had been fenced really close to the water, this allowed the new fencing to be placed a little further back. Some repair and placements of the fences and access points for water, because there still has to be occasional spots to get across the stream, and gates put in so that can happen, as well as, you know, the stray cow that, of course, or calf that happens to get into those places. You have to have a way of getting them out as well. And the other important thing that this and many of the projects we're involved in is really considering wildlife friendly fencing now too. So these are important corridors for big game a lot of the time, and so using different kinds of heights and using more smooth wire and not just barbed wire with certain height restrictions means that it is less likely to get damaged by big game crossing through it, and it means that saves on maintenance, but it's also better for other kinds of wildlife. So lots of sort of added things as we learn more about how to do these projects even better. This is an example of one of the sites that looks at sort of 3 different years of photos. You can see there was, in 2004, the fence was up, and this was a situation where the fence was really close at one of those sites. And in 2020, with the newer funding, we and our partners and the landowners had recognized that it made a lot more sense to move it further back. You can see that even as it's healing, there's still a natural amount of erosion that happens on the outside corners of streams, because that's what they normally do. Sorry about that. And giving it more space means that there's less likely erosion going to erode away the fence. And over time, again, as woody plants start to regrow and can be replanted, it's an opportunity for that to happen. So that's a kind of what you would call exclusion fencing, so keeping the cattle out or excluding them. But, you know, I think one of the things we've really realized over the years is that the more space you can give the fence, the better, because you see in the picture on the right that the stream sometimes moves more than the fence it does, and it washes it away. So it leads to costly repairs and maintenance, of course, challenges, but also it just gives more room for management opportunity in the future, which maybe wouldn't be planned for otherwise. So really valuable to just recognize that streams naturally move and sort of planning for that in the management choices. This is an example of another very, very early buck for wildlife type project. Former colleague of mine who's over 6 feet, standing in the excluded area, and just showing how thick the grasses were, and it's extremely narrowly fenced. And what the landowners have found over the decades is that not only can't they get in there to graze it if they wanted to, because there's a lot of forage productivity, but all that litter, that material has built up over time. In some places might be considered a fire hazard, but not typically in a riparian area because there's of the extra moisture, but it becomes a weed issue. Canada thistle and sometimes other weeds really love to get started in all of that litter, all that material that's left behind, and you can't get in there to manage it readily or safely, because of course you are close to water, so there are limited options. And the other issue that arises when you have very narrowly fenced stream banks is if you do want to try to graze it at some point in the future, because of those needs like fire or weed management, there's almost not enough space to do that. So the picture on the right shows more of what you might call a grazable corridor, where the fence is a little further back and it becomes a management unit that can be used in that way when appropriate and with controlled grazing. So a lot of the work we're doing with the native trout in particular, and riparian management and grazing, is in multi-use landscapes on the eastern part of Alberta, the eastern slopes, which is the western part of Alberta. And that's where there's recreation, there's oil and gas and industry and timber and grazing and all kinds of things, random camping, all happening together. And you can see the pictures there where the cows are walking around people's camping units. And it's a real challenge to figure out how to put all those things together. So I encourage you, if you are involved in that work, to just work with the other kinds of land users to make that happen. And this is just an example of some restoration happening actually after some snow had fallen in the fall, getting those kinds of live willow stakes planted at some sites. And it's figuring out how to do that in a multi-land use landscape is much more complicated than on private land or leased land that's managed by one user. So how do you know if it's making a difference if you're doing these things? Well, sometimes even after long periods of modified use and rest, it doesn't happen quickly. This is a shot from an offsite watering system that's in the range of 20 years old. This site maybe hasn't declined in health at all, but the woody plants that were missing haven't really expanded. You sort of have one willow and a few poplars or aspen left, and not really much has changed. Where that little willow is, where the arrow is pointing, is a little tiny creek, and there's not been a lot of rebounding. So sometimes we need to help these places. If the natural pieces have gone missing or are struggling to come back, especially when you have a lot of non-native grasses that are very abundant and very vigorous. It can be a challenge for, say, willows to return. This is a site where not only did they didn't. Yep.
Norine, just so that you know, we are out of time. So maybe just finish up this slide, please.
Thanks, will do, Amy. So this is just a shot to show you that we do want to evolve grazing management. Sometimes you start with one thing and move to a next, and that can continue to help these sites evolve. So with that, I'll sign off, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Norine. This is a tough job. I don't like interrupting people.
No, it was good because I thought maybe I heard a sound, but I wasn't sure. So it's good you jumped in.
Yeah, my singing bowl doesn't sing enough, I guess. So we'll move on to the next presentation, which is a co-presentation. And I will invite Angela and Angie to turn on their cameras and load up their presentations. Angela 10, as a lover of both fish and the outdoors, it was inevitable that Angela fell in the world of fisheries management. Through her studies at the University of Alberta, she was able to cultivate a strong background in conservation biology, while her work in the field allowed her to gain valuable experience and perspectives from those who lived and worked on the land, and learn new approaches to solving fisheries and landscape management issues. Angela currently lives and works in Calgary as a junior biologist with Trout Unlimited Canada. So welcome, Angela. And I'll also introduce Angie Quist now. Angie Quist is also a colleague of mine, so I'm really happy to be able to introduce her. She is a riparian specialist for cows and fish, working on the Eastern Slopes program, ranging from south of Sundre to south of Grand Prairie, pardon me. Angie works with communities and landowners in the northern reaches of the Eastern Slopes on riparian management to increase watershed and ecological resiliency. And their presentation today is about community involvement on the Tay River. I'll let you ladies take it away.
Okay, I'm just gonna make sure that you're seeing what you're supposed to be seeing with my presentation.
I am.
Okay. Hi, I'm Angie Quist. I'm a riparian specialist with cows and fish. I am based out of Rocky Mountain House, and I work as part of the Eastern Slopes program.
And hi, I'm Angela 10. I'm a junior fisheries biologist with Trout Unlimited Canada. We're based out of Calgary, and we work a lot, or I'm based out of Calgary, and I work a lot in the Eastern Slopes as well. So Trout Unlimited Canada is an environmental organization. We do a lot of on-the-ground work in freshwater ecosystems specifically, and a lot of stream and riparian restoration work. We have a lot of volunteer-based chapters all across Canada and professional staff in Calgary and Guelph.
Cows and Fish, Norine kind of gave you a little summary of the work that we do, so I'll just make another note about kind of what I do: riparian management education, including workshops and events, stream and riparian restoration, a lot of what Norine has already showed you and you'll see in this presentation as well. And we also do riparian health inventories and assessments to kind of get a snapshot of the health of the projects that we work on.
So today we're going to be talking to you guys a bit about some work that we've done in the Tay River over the past couple of years. But of course, we need to select sites to work on before we can do any work on the ground. So we did a whole bunch of site prioritization work, and we worked closely with Alberta Environment Parks and Cows and Fish to do this work. So we use the READY model to do a lot of the preliminary work. This stands for the Road Erosion Sediment Delivery Model. It basically just looks at where roads intersect watercourses and they set points for sediment delivery. And so we went to go visit all these sites that the model set out for us on foot just to verify them. We had a form on an app to fill out when we were there and took a whole bunch of pictures. And in total, we surveyed 270 sites. After all of this field work, we went back to the office to do some triaging. So we took all of the info that we collected on site and ranked each site on a scale of 0 to 5, which with 0 being no action needed and 5 being high urgent action needed. Then we grouped everything by location and we presented all this information to Alberta Environment Parks, who helped refine this site selection further. For example, by excluding some sites that were owned by a forestry company or stuff that was on a pipeline right of way. And in the end, that gave us the triage map that you'll see next here. And we narrowed it all down to a handful of sites in just 4 groups for the first round of riparian rehab in 2021.
So you should be seeing a poll pop up on your screens here pretty soon. And we're just kind of wondering if you've volunteered with conservation or restoration projects before. And if so, what? It's multiple choice, so you can choose all that apply. And if you have, let us know what and where in the chat. All right, looks like there's a wide variety. Most of you have been involved and involved in quite a few, so that's awesome. So when you get the community involved in restoration projects, there's more stewardship and onus on taking care of the land. So by getting the community involved, we are not only increasing awareness of the issues on the landscape, but the restoration projects are more likely to be successful and impactful because we have more eyes on the land noting issues, people involved in stewardship and maintaining of the land, and hopefully they tell people they know, which further increases awareness. With the Tay River project, we had the community get involved on the project and help us with the target prioritized sites that Angela had mentioned earlier.
So one big group that we got involved were anglers. Originally, we weren't too sure about the bull trout presence in the Tay River, and angler accounts and photos of bull trout in the Tay were really vital pieces of information that helped us fill this knowledge gap. We also worked with anglers to perform several other fishery surveys, like the one you'll see in this video coming up, where we worked with the Central Alberta chapter of TUC and Alberta Environment Parks to do an electrofishing volunteer workday.
So there's 3 videos I'm going to share. Some of them are a little bit quieter, so if you could just keep your audio up, that would be great. All right.
So we're here today with Trout Unlimited Canada and Alberta Environment Parks and a crew of hardworking volunteers, and we're electrofishing.
Tay is a Top 10 watershed, so we've got 15 electrofishing sites.
And we're sampling 300 meters of the Tay River to see what fish species are living here right now, and we're hoping to see some bull trout.
And this project in the Tay River is one of a few different projects going on in the Rocky Mountain House area. So we've been doing some reclamation work on Rocky Creek and Fall Creek as well, in the Clearwater and Ram River drainages. And this summer we've sampled I think 60 or 75 sites within those watersheds. Again, monitoring fish populations, seeing if bull trout will respond to our reclamation efforts.
We got to follow along and scoop the fish up, and then we dumped them into a bucket, and we got to see what we caught.
So I followed the netters, and then they just turned around and we put the fish in the bucket. And then once we had a number of fish in the bucket, then they'll take them to the station for evaluation.
Oh, we got some whitefish, a couple brown trout, sculpin, long-nosed dace,
and a little nymph of sorts there.
Yeah, there's some sort of nymph.
A little brookie and little brown out of the Tay River. Electroshocking sample. These are all the captured electroshocked fish back into the Tay River. Looking for some bull trout. None have been found so far, but the Tay River, a tributary of the Clearwater, used to have some bull trout in it. All these willows that have been planted along the Tay River here have been installed by volunteers as well. That'll help the bank stabilization, and that included lots of different groups, including the Central Alberta chapter of Trout Unlimited. And they spent a Saturday out here under the leadership of Trout Unlimited Canada. Here we are at the 300-meter mark of the last sample of the Tay River project, and the guys are just at the marker, and this is the 40th sample, I believe, in this area that the guys have taken and gals have taken from Trout Unlimited Canada and Sustainable Resources, and the guys are just getting ready to pack up.
Hi, I'm Nadine.
That's our next video, but we'll wait for that one.
All right, so in addition to this e-fishing day, we also set up a fish trap to capture and take some bull trout in 2020. And we had a lot of volunteer anglers come out to help process the fish and maintain the trap while it was up. And as a direct result of all these fish surveys, there were changes to angling regulations to help protect the limited bull trout spawning run in the Tay River. We also set up some arrays in 2021 to track the movement of the tagged fish, and we had some volunteer anglers come out again to perform some supplementary angling surveys to catch and tag some more fish, and also come out and help check and maintain the arrays. In total, about 2 kilometers of the Tay River was sampled with e-fishing and angling. And this email you see on the screen over here, bull trout, this email is always open for if you've ever caught bull trout in the Tay River and you have any photos or experiences or just stories that you want to share about bull trout in the Tay River. So I'll post this link in the chat shortly too.
So we were able to gain interest of 2 agricultural producers on the Tay River who are interested in maintaining the health and integrity of the Tay that flows through their land. Through the use of Clearwater County's Caring for My Land program and the Provincial Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program grant and Cows and Fish's Alberta Environment Parks grant and Federal Native Trout grant, we were able to work with the landowners on best management of the stream and surrounding riparian area. Livestock was distributed away from the Tay River through fencing and offsite watering systems, and about 2.6 kilometers of the Tay was fenced off from livestock with the funding. Nicholas and Nadine were one of the landowners that worked with us on the Tay River. I have a short clip here from Nadine talking about the project, and this is one of the videos that's a little more quiet, so you'll want to turn up your volume if you can.
Hi, I'm Nadine. My husband and I have a cow-calf ranch in Clearwater County. We worked with Trout Unlimited and Cows and Fish to better understand riparian habitat and to learn what we can do to keep our land vibrant while still making a revenue from it. Cows and Fish support the separation of livestock from water sources, and since they supplement fencing costs, this ends up being a win-win relationship. We wanted to fence our animals out of the river for a few reasons. We didn't want our land to be eroded down the river during spring runoff or when there's high water levels. We had a flood event that happened about 2 years ago, and as a result some of our riverbank eroded. However, it would have been a different scenario if we had allowed our livestock to chew the grasses and the trees along the riverbank. Cows and Fish also taught us about poplar staking for areas that didn't fare well during that flood time. Another great reason to keep our herd distance from the riverbanks is to keep their natural fertilizer on the land and out of the water. Since manure is detrimental to the health of the fish, separating livestock from the rivers helps to reduce parasite issues as well, and ensures a clean drinking water source for our animals. This helps to maintain ecological integrity and diversity. Working with Cows and Fish also helped to cover.
Kind of repeating what she had said before about us helping supplement some cost with our program grants that we have. So going back to the presentation here. As Nadine had mentioned, we also helped them stabilize some eroding banks along the stream. We held a workday with Clearwater County, Trout Unlimited Canada, Cows and Fish, and Nick to collect and stake willows and poplar into the banks. You can see what a gorgeous section of the Tay they have flowing through their land and why they would want to preserve it. Fun fact, the first bull trout caught in 2 years of sampling was caught on the day we did the restoration on Nick and Nadine's land. It was during spawning. I like to think of them as good luck for the project. This summer, we will be looking into beaver coexistence options for the beaver dams they have on their properties. And finally, we had motorized recreationists get involved in this project. Motorized recreation can have a huge impact on the land and our watersheds, so it's vital that we work with this community to find solutions. The local ATV club, Rocky ATV Society, joined us to learn more about sustainable recreation for more willow staking in the watershed and to help us collect watercourse crossing data on a pipeline that runs through the watershed and is being used as a trail. So here we have Wendy Davies, who joined us on the Tay River Ride Day, and she'll let you know how the experience was for her.
I'm Wendy Davies, and I'm from Rocky Mountain House, and my husband and I are part of the Rocky ATV Society. When we saw the opportunity to go help out cows and fish for the day, we did it because we were new to ATV riding and we didn't know very much about the trails in the area, and we want to be responsible riders, and so we wanted to find out some ways that we could protect the waterways. We also thought it would be a good place to meet some other riders and learn about some trails in the area. When we arrived, we got to the site, which had been all dug up already to prevent riders and ATVs from getting into the area, and took in a big pile of willow branches, which we stuck into the soil next to the water. We also made a barricade that went across the slope down to the water using upright branches and then weaving other willow branches in between them. And when we finished, we put rotting logs and moss and things down in between over the bare dirt to help plants grow back into that area and to reclaim it the way it was before. In the afternoon after lunch, which they provided for us, we used the app to on some trail rides that is used to determine the quality of water crossings and whether they need repairs or not. And we understand that a provincial database has been set up for this information to be collected. So we learned a lot about why certain rivers need to be reclaimed, and we're more aware of the importance of the protecting the bull trout waterways. And I think this kind of collaboration between local ATV groups and environmental groups is essential. And I really enjoyed the day learning that, you know, putting a willow branch that looks dead into the ground can turn into a tree, and as if it had always been there. So we had a great day.
As Wendy had mentioned, where she talked about an app, that was the Alberta Watercourse Crossing Inventory app. Axel Anderson talked about this app in session 2 of our workshop. You can watch the replay to learn more about the initiative, and the email for that should be sent out tomorrow. And in the photos, you can see Angela working with the volunteers, creating some wattle fences and with some willow stakes there. Trout Unlimited Canada also upgraded a bridge that was falling apart and made it wider for side-by-sides to be able to go across it to help get more wheels out of sensitive areas. And here you can see in the bottom corner, the Rocky ATV Society with Kenton from AAP, just using the app on one of the crossings on the pipeline.
All right, so we'd like to thank all of our partners for helping us facilitate this work. We really couldn't have done it without any of you guys. And if any of you guys that are attending here today said that you hadn't been part of a volunteer event before, like, this can be you. We do have lots of volunteer events, both TUC and Cows and Fish host a bunch. And I'm sure if you reached out to any of your other local environmental groups, you'll find some more opportunities as well to work.
Thank you so much, Angela and Angie. That was fantastic. And I'll echo the comments of sort of your last video. I don't recall her name. I apologize, but she talked a lot about collaboration and that you need collaboration to make this work happen. And I think you two did a wonderful job at showcasing that. So thank you very much. And then I will invite up our next presenter, who is Cal Hill. This is my first time meeting Cal. Was, I think, 20 minutes before the session started today, and it was great to meet him, and I look forward to working with him a little bit more. Cal graduated from the University of Calgary in 1980 with a Bachelor of Science degree in geology. He began his career as a reservoir geologist, subsequently progressing through various leadership positions, culminating in leading regulatory change and strategic planning and energy regulation. He retired in 2017. Congratulations. Growing up in rural area of the foothills, he always had a passion for the outdoors and the environment. He currently spends his time volunteering, hiking, and backpacking, trying to master outdoor photography and occasionally fly fishing. Cal is currently the president of the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society, a watershed stewardship group that you heard about from Marina in the Ghost River watershed. So take it away, Cal.
Thanks very much, Amy. I guess first off, can everybody see my slides?
We can.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I guess I do feel a bad pun time. I do feel like a little bit like a fish out of water being the only male presenter here tonight on International Women's Day. But anyway, I'll do my best here. So Marina's talked a little bit about the Ghost Watershed Alliance, so I won't go into that in any detail. And she's also talked about one of our key projects that we get involved in, which is the bioengineering. And another one that we've kicked off about 2 years ago was water monitoring. And one of the things, we did a state of the watershed report here a number of years ago, and one of the things that came out of that as a recommendation was to get a better understanding of the aquatic invertebrates that live in our watershed. But it's tough to figure out how to go about doing that. And we lucked into a program called Cabin Stream. And that's what I intend on covering here tonight. So there's sort of 4 things that I'll talk about a little bit: what Cabin Stream is, a little bit about what kind of results that come out of it, and then how we've used this type of a program in our watershed and what we've discovered to this point in time. So Cabin is it's an acronym that stands for the Canadian Aquatic Bio Monitoring Network, and it's a set of protocols and standards that were put together by Environment Canada and Climate Change, along with a number of their partners. And it's federal, goes right across Canada, big uptake in BC and to some extent in Eastern and Canada. And the focus is on monitoring overall and getting a good indication of what water quality looks like and be able to compare right across the country. But there's a number of aspects to it, but the key one is focused on benthic macroinvertebrates. And what these things are, for anybody who is not sure, benthic means bottom dwelling. Macro means you can see it with the naked eye, and invertebrate means there's no backbone. So these are the little bugs that crawl along the bottom of creeks and streams and lakes. And for the anglers out there, some of these you'll be familiar with. So I'm not going to keep calling them benthic macroinvertebrates because it's a big mouthful. I'm just going to call them bugs from now on. You'll know what I'm talking about. But the ones that you see in the picture here, there's the big guy right dead center is a stonefly nymph, which is something, again, anglers will be familiar with. And just off to the right, the slide right, not his right, to his elbow, there's a little wee guy that's a mayfly nymph. And then right behind it is a caddisfly nymph. So these 3 are particularly important in our streams because they're relatively intolerant to pollution. So they require clean water to live in. So that's one of the reasons that the Cabin monitoring program was developed, and why they use biomonitoring is because these little critters are they're present in all freshwater ecosystems. They're sensitive to different pollutants. They're sensitive to climate change. They're relatively easy to monitor and assess, and they're a really important part of the food web. So certainly in our watershed, and probably most of the rest of the watersheds in eastern slopes, these are a prime food source for our native trout species. So the second piece is the stream piece, which is very much associated with the Cabin part. What stream stands for is sequencing the rivers for environmental assessment and monitoring. And the thing that this does that's a little bit different is it uses DNA of these little bugs to determine what's present in a sample. And I'll cover that a little bit more here coming up. So as I mentioned, primarily Cabin has 4 main components to it. The one is the biological component, and that's the one with the bugs, collecting these bugs. And the process that's used, Cabin sets out very stringent processes and standards, and even for site selection, how you pick and choose the sites that you want to do your monitoring on. And once you've chosen a site for the collecting the bugs, we use kicknet samples. And for the cabin, there's one kicknet sample. And then for the stream part, there's 3. So the idea is you get in the water with your waders on, kick the rocks around, let the bugs float into the net. And once you've got a net full, you take them to shore to process them. And that involves putting them through sieves and washing all the little bugs out of the net ultimately into a sample jar. And that sample jar is closed up and labeled and ultimately gets sent off to the lab. So for each site, we did 3 kicknet samples for the stream as part of the protocols. And these get sent to a lab at the University of Guelph, Ontario. They basically take those 3 samples and dump them into a blender and make a big bug smoothie out of them, and then take the DNA out of that bug smoothie and then map it against the DNA in their database. And that tells how many different species of bugs are present in that sample. It doesn't give us any idea about how many bugs, but it does tell us what types are there right down to a species level. And so just a bit of a reminder of the taxonomy hierarchy. I won't go through the whole thing, but the ones we're interested in start with order, family, genus, and species. And this gets us pretty accurate down to the species level. The 4th kicknet sample is the cabin kicknet sample, and that's sent off to a taxonomy lab where there's folks that have the expertise to sit down and poke through all the bugs in this collection, figure out what they are. And what this provides us as well is it actually gives us abundance because they count each bug of each different type that they find. Typically doesn't get to species levels. Generally, it's only to family and genus. And then the second part, which is a complement to the biological part, is the chemical portion. And I'm not going to go through them all, but you can see them listed there. Typical things that you look for when you're monitoring for the chemistry of water. All of these are critical they have to be in the right range for aquatic invertebrates to live, but also for our fish and anything else that wants to live in the water. So one of the things we do is take water samples, send them off to a lab, and we use a multimeter to collect some of the rest of this information. And the third component is the physical component, looking at the stream, how wide it is, how deep it is, how fast it flows, what the slope is, and what the substrate at the bottom is composed of. So fine gravels or sand or bedrock in some instances. And this is all, again, pretty critical stuff when it comes to aquatic invertebrates and where you might find them and sort of the location of them. And it impacts a variety of things. For example, water temperature has a big impact on dissolved oxygen. If we take a year like last year, which was unprecedentedly warm, the water temperatures are up, which typically means then the dissolved oxygen levels go down, and that's bad news for our native trout and for the little bugs that live there. And then the 4th component is a geographic component, which covers the geography of an area, everything from the ecoregion that the site is located in, the streamside vegetation. We've heard lots about that to this point, and what the surrounding land use are. And this is important to know how much impact there may be from anything from logging to OHV use or cattle grazing. All of that's marked down. And the reason for this is to be able to compare similar geographic sites. And we'll talk a little bit about the 2 types of sites that we monitor later on, but this is a critical component of being able to make that comparison. There's a number of different objectives to the cabin stream program. I just picked off about 4 here that I think are certainly relevant to the work we're doing. The first is to understand the impacts of land use on aquatic ecosystems. This slide shows, and Marina talked about this quite a bit, is we get turbid water entering this. In this particular case, it's the Wipers Creek. And in the Wipers area, over the last few decades, the amount of high water events with dirty water is, from an anecdotal point of view, has gone up significantly. And it's a lot to do with the linear disturbance trails and seismic lines with lots of use on them. And whenever there's a rainfall event, it washes this material into the creeks, which certainly has a detrimental effect on the bugs that the fish eat and also on the fish themselves. So in a second objective is, it's an opportunity to use a standardized approach that has some credibility to it. And rather than us going out and trying to figure out how to do this on our own, we basically had this, it was a bit of a gift to have the opportunity to contribute to the Cabin Stream initiative, to be able to have access to the protocols that are used. And then another one is just to get an idea of baseline of water quality. So over the next few years, we hope to be able to do this for a number of years. And it gives an idea of the trends on whether water quality is staying pretty much the same, or whether it's deteriorating further. And if it is deteriorating, what we need to do about it. And then finally, another one is because this program is fairly extensive right across Canada, it gives us an opportunity to tap into the knowledge from other groups that are involved in the same work. And for us, this being a volunteer group, a lot of us don't have all the experience we need or the knowledge we need to figure out what to do with the data once we collect it. So this is a great opportunity for us. So how do you participate in Cabin Stream? The first step, and we were lucky enough to have an opportunity to get some training back in 2019 before COVID stopped the training in 2020, and I believe in 2021 as well. There's online courses that you have to take, a number of modules, and if you're fortunate enough to pass those, a 2-day field course, and we took it in Canmore. And if you pass that, then you get a field technician certificate, which allows you to go out and do the actual sampling. But you need at least one individual who carries on, has a project manager certification, which means more modules. And that allows you to actually run the program. And it's part of the protocols that you need to have all the training in place. Equipment and supplies, a big part of it. You can see some of the little bright orange kick nets that are used in the water, but there's a lot of other equipment too, from sieves and buckets and waders. Safety equipment is critically important, especially on the bigger streams. And all this is equipment we had to supply on our own. So we were fortunate a lot of the companies give us a pretty good break being a nonprofit organization. And I also noted transportation here, because depending on the watershed that you're in, access to some of these sites can be pretty difficult. And in our case, over half of them require a 4-wheel drive, high clearance, and in one case, an ATV, because there's no real easy way to get access to the site. So it's pretty important. And we're also, again, borrowing from volunteers their vehicles to do the work. So on that basis, the volunteers that we had working for us are absolutely critical to the project. There's 4 of us that are trained, but we had access to about another 8 different volunteers. And 5 to 7 people per sample site seem to work out really well and then get the job done in a reasonable amount of time. Timing, the protocols require this to be done in the fall, and so that there is a way of being able to compare right across different basins right across Canada, but also because water levels tend to be lower in the fall and clear, so which is good for both safety, but again, it makes it easier to collect some of the little critters that we're looking for. So interpreting results, this is where it gets pretty interesting. What do you do with the data once you get it? First off, there's 2 different types of monitoring sites. There's what's called reference sites. And so these are sites that are chosen in areas that maintain their natural look. There's very little impact from humans. And if there's enough of these sites in an area, a reference model is built. And we don't have one for these slopes yet. There's a number of organizations that are working toward that. And then there's a series of test sites. And these test sites are chosen where there's a belief that there could be an impact, or to build a baseline. And that's what we're currently doing. Once that's done, you can compare them to the reference sites to see if there's been any impairment of water quality. And if so, then you have to figure out what's causing it. There's a number of different ways of looking at the bugs to figure out what are they telling us. One of them is species richness. So the more species you have present at a site, the better. Abundance, which is how many of the actual individual bugs do you collect, and the more of those, for the most part, is better. And species diversity, which differs a little bit from species richness, because it's not just how many species, but how even are they distributed. So you don't really want one that's dominant with a whole pile of bugs in that species and very few bugs in the other species. The more even they are, the better. In water quality, again, the chemical and physical properties, if they can stay within a range that's suitable for the aquatic invertebrates, then it's also helpful for our native trout populations. So probably one of there's a number of different ways the analysis is done, but one of the easiest to sort of understand and figure out was just a comparison of certain kinds of bugs. So the 3 on the upper ones, the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, are all very sensitive to pollution. And the letters in brackets are the order. So mayflies is Ephemerotoptera, I can never pronounce that properly. Stoneflies is Plecoptera, and then caddisflies is Trichoptera. Those are the order. that they belong to. And at the bottom is Diptera, which is the order, and that's flies and midges. And the C stands for chironomids. And again, the anglers in the crowd will probably be familiar with pretty much all of these bugs. But the idea here is that if the ratio of good bugs to bad bugs is very high, it's a really strong indicator of good water quality. So how we used it in our watershed, we've done this for 2 years. We intended to do the Wipers Creek in 1 year and the Ghost River in the 2nd year. And just to give I'll have a map come up here to show where these are. But the 2 major streams in the Ghost Watershed are the Wipers that comes in, drains a lot of the north and the eastern side, and the Ghost drains the south and the western side. But we did make a few changes, and primarily because of a fire that swept through there in the fall of 2020. This slide here, looking in towards Elmer Mountain, you can see some burnt trees on the right. And our westernmost sample site that we did last year was about where those dark colored trees are. Just beyond those were the notches in the mountains there. And that puts us just above the burn, and it also puts us in the Ghost Wilderness area. So the fire started in the fall of 2020. It was started from an abandoned campsite. It burnt west up the Ghost Valley, and it burnt down east down the Ghost Valley, and then up a side valley, which is what's shown here. This is a valley between Black Rock Mountain, which some of you may be familiar with, and Devil's Head Mountain straight to the west. The little puddle you see off to the right center is Johnson Lake, which is at the headwaters of one of the main tributaries to the Wipers. So the reason for the interest in this is that wildfires can have a significant detrimental effect to water quality. And the City of Calgary's source water plan is one of the main risks that they're concerned about is wildfire. And the reason for that is things like increased nutrient load, heavy metals that get introduced into the water supply. And then with runoff, you can get organic carbon and high turbidity rates, among other things. And all of these things can be difficult to treat, also because they can change. The values can change depending on a wet year for a dry year. Last year was a very dry year with very little runoff, so it gave us a chance to get in there and get some baseline data before we see an impact from the fire. I'm not sure, I can't recall whether Marina showed this slide or not, but it gives an example of the watershed where it's at. You can see the Wipers. It's hard to see the actual creek, but if you can see where Highway 40 is, it follows the Wipers all the way up to just about to the top end, and you can see it branch off to the west or to the left. The Ghost River, if you go to the blue dashed on the left is the Ghost Wilderness area, and you see the black dot that's in that. The fire starts just to the east of that, burnt through that whole orange area and into the white area just about where Black Rock Mountain is, or just to the south of it. Now it's important, keep an eye on that little black dot. As I mentioned, that's the one what's in the furthest most to the west. So it's in the wilderness area, which is very difficult to get at. So in theory, should have been our most pristine site that we sampled. Oh, I should have mentioned all the other little dots are the sites that we did sample on the creek. And we tried to sample above and below some of the major tributaries as well. So what did we find? So far, we've got the DNA results back for both years, but we only have it back from 2020. We're expecting it for 2021 at any time. The overall benthic macro and bird health was excellent, with one exception. And all of them were very high. So that ratio of good bugs to bad bugs was very good. And the water quality from a chemistry point of view is also very good. The expectation is if there is some detrimental effect, it'll probably be accumulative as you go downstream. And we did see a little bit of this in the Wipers at the very confluence just before it runs into the Ghost was our poorest from a ratio of good bugs to bad bugs. But even at that, compared to a lot of basins, it was still very good. The only anomaly that we had was the one that I pointed out that was in the Ghost Wilderness area, which should have been one of our best sites. As it turns out, it was the worst site we had, with the highest amount of the Diptera, which are the bugs that are tolerant to pollution. And we were missing caddisflies completely. There wasn't any collected whatsoever. So we're not sure what happened there, whether this is something with the sampling that went wrong, or if there's something else that's going on, but it was highly unusual. It should have been our very best site, and it turns out it's by far, it's the exception to the rule. We haven't got the DNA results back. So once we do, I'm out of time, okay? So I'm just about done. So that's it for results. Next year, we'll do a few more sites. And then finally, we couldn't do this without our volunteers, critical to the whole exercise. And the organizations that support us, which are, a lot of them are here tonight, and those that provide funding, and the labs that have given us a big break in the costs of our equipment. So that's it. Look forward to questions later on. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you so much, Cal. And I can see the photography. Those were some beautiful photos. So we're just a little bit over time, but we do have one more presenter, Nicole Pilgrim. So Nicole, I'll invite you to turn on your camera and load up your presentation. Nicole is the Aquatic Species at Risk Coordinator with Alberta Environment Parks. She works with Alberta Environment Parks fish biologists, the federal government, and public stakeholders on native trout recovery projects across the eastern slopes, including recovery planning, on-the-ground field work, and education and outreach. Nicole grew up with a love of the outdoors and fish and wildlife, which led her to pursue a Bachelor of Biology and a Master's in Fish Toxicology from the University of Lethbridge. Nicole has worked as a fisheries biologist for over 10 years throughout Alberta, putting in many thousands of seconds on backpack electrofishers over the years. Take it away, Nicole.
Thank you, Amy. And can you hear me and see my screen that I'm sharing right now?
We can.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'll try and go quick here so that we have time for questions, but what I'm sharing today is a digital story that I actually created with a digital workshop series that was put on by Cows and Fish through the Story Center. And so I was lucky enough to attend the workshop and be able to showcase some of the fieldwork that I've been a part of through Story. So I chose to do a story about West Slope cutthroat trout and the field project that I participated in last summer for the West Slope cutthroat trout recovery broodstock. So this is a new initiative by Alberta Environment Parks to collect pure West Slope cutthroat trout eggs and milt.
Nicole, is anyone else seeing black? I'm just seeing black, and I see someone else in the comments just not seeing anything either.
Okay, I'm just gonna do an introduction and then hopefully play the video.
Okay.
Let me see. Does that change?
Yes, okay, sorry.
Okay, no worries. So this project, we took the offspring, so the eggs and milt from wild West Slope cutthroat trout, fertilized them, and then brought them into the hatchery. These fish will become the parents of West Slope cutthroat trout, and that will be used for recovery stocking into the future so that we can work on supporting these populations in Southwest Alberta. So I'm just showing a very quick 3-minute digital story here today on the project. However, if you want extra all the details of the project, there is going to be another presentation by one of my colleagues, Andreas Luke, on the technical session for this native trout webinar series that's happening next week, March 15th. So with that, I'm going to start playing this video, and then we'll do a couple polls. The pouring rain causes me to hunch. It's a good thing I'm covered head to toe in waterproof waders and rain jacket. I push against the rushing water as I wade upstream. I use my dip net as a wading staff. It's been 10 long days of searching and capturing spawning West Slope cutthroat trout. I'm tired. West Slope cutthroat trout are a threatened species at risk. Their populations have been decimated in the last 50 years or so due to increasing human demands on the landscape. The pockets of stream that they hang on to indicate areas where the wilderness has escaped the majority of human development. Important places to hold on to. My mind wanders as I continue to trudge upstream with the rest of my team. What would a West Slope cutthroat trout be feeling on a day like this? I'm exhausted. 3 weeks of fighting the raging stream. I'm trying to return to where I was born. Today I ran into a barrier I can't get by. This has been our home for thousands of years. Things are not the same. We used to swim freely. Now there's things that look like food, but pull me out of the water. The waters are warmer, often muddied. There's new kinds of fish. My species is fading. I've seen things that are starting to help. New trees provide shade. The water is running clear. I've heard stories from my friends. They can swim all the way back to their birthplace. All these things give me hope. A flick of a tail under a pile of woody debris pulls my attention back to my task. There's one right here. Grab it, I yell to my coworker. We both scoop our nets under the pile of logs and branches. I pull my net to the surface and see a flopping West Slope cutthroat trout, its belly plump and squishy with eggs. It's one more fish that I can help spawn and increase the survival of its young. Suddenly, I'm not so tired after all. All right, thanks for watching that video. And if we could pull up the polls now, we have a couple questions from you. So 2 quick questions here. Did this digital story make you more aware of the challenges that West Slope cutthroat trout face? And then would you like to see more of these type of stories in this communication style from the government of Alberta? So you take a couple of minutes and answer that. That would be great. And then I'll pull up the second part of my presentation. Great, thank you for answering those polls. Great responses, and thank you. Hopefully we can get to do more of these cool videos in the future. So now, if you can see on my screen, I have a couple slides here about our Native Trout Communication Collaborative. So the Native Trout Communication Collaborative is a group of organizations that have come together to advance public education and communication on native trout recovery. So organizations that are involved are all the logos that you see up on the screen. So we have CPAWS, ACA, Alberta Environment Parks, Cows and Fish, and Trout Unlimited Canada. And funding is coming from the Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So one thing that we aim to do with this group is several ways of communication and education around native trout. So this involves developing a communication strategy, several different types of surveys to gather information, working with focus groups to better understand people's values, doing research, some of the advertising in magazines, lots of social media, which you may have seen, and of course, outreach events like trade shows or meeting people out on the landscape. So with that, I have a couple polls queued up here. If we can bring those up. that'd be great. These involve a little bit more reading, so we'll give you a little bit of time there to read through those. So the first one is, what type of communication from the Native Trout Collaborative do you find most useful? So you can pick one of those or give us other ideas in the chat. That would be super helpful. The second part is, what is an action that you can commit to support native trout recovery? And so we just have a single choice right there, but what will you be interested in helping us with? And if what you want to do is not listed there, please also add to the chat, or if you have other suggestions. Okay, great. Thanks so much for all of your answers. That's very helpful to us. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and Amy, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your video. It was excellent. I was happy to participate in that workshop with you. You did an amazing job. It's now time to open up our question period. And so I will invite all of the presenters to turn on their cameras, and I'll begin with the Q&A box. Again, if you have any questions, please place them in the question and answer box, and we will try to get to them in the remaining amount of time. So I see a question here that was marked answered, but wasn't answered. And so I will direct this question to, and now it just disappeared on me. Awesome. I will direct it to Angela. And there was a question regarding a technique that you described. I apologize because it's totally vanished off my screen. Here we go. Just so on the arrays that you talked about, can you elaborate on what that entails?
Yeah, sure. So my colleague Evan explained it a little bit in the chat, but basically in 2020, we caught a whole bunch of fish and implanted some tags in them. They're basically just like little microchips that you can put in the fish. And in 2021, we put a bunch of arrays up, and those arrays are basically just like sensors, big sensors for the tags, so that it's kind of like a loop. And when the fish swims through the loop, it'll ping the number of the fish so that we know like when it was at a certain station, and like maybe like when it went up and when it went down. And it gives us information on the movement pattern and timing of movement of the fish.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. Sorry for the for the stumble there in finding the technique. And I have a question here from Lynn, and I believe this is for Cal, just based on the time that it was asked. And I think she is asking a question about whether the benthic invertebrates would be found in dugouts. And I see a comment that there is an old stream bed on my farm, and I'm interested in seeing if I could get it going again.
Good question. And I can't say for certain that they would be, but most of those benthic invertebrates spend a big chunk of their life cycle in the river. But as you can see, when they're adults, they can fly, and then they can deposit eggs. So if the dugout was clean enough with clean water, there is potential that you could have some of those there. Unlikely for things like stoneflies, but there is potential, depending on the size of the dugout and how clean it is, that there could be some that might survive in it.
Thank you, Cal. And I have a question, and I think this is for Nicole to start. Where did you collect the West Slope broodstock? And are you also going to acquire broodstock from Pickle Jar Lakes?
Thanks for that question. So we collected broodstock out in the Old Man Watershed, and there are no plans to collect any broodstock right now from Pickle Jar Lakes, but we are looking at doing more collection. And this is just so that we can continue to increase genetic diversity of our pure West Slope cutthroat trout so that we can ensure they're very like a robust population that we're raising for our recovery stocking into the future.
Thank you, Nicole. And I think this question could be for either Marina or Cal. Has there been any discussion of facilitating revegetation of the burn area for slope stabilization? For example, seeding with fireweed in high severity areas far from the seed source, and possible 2 billion tree funding for planting seedlings.
Well, I'll take a crack first, and Marina can step in if she knows something I don't. There's nothing that I'm aware of any planting, but I will say we were in there late last fall, and the fact that the burn occurred almost exactly a year prior, it's amazing how much of reforestation there already is. We saw small little spruce seedlings at about an inch tall that were already sprouting up, and lots of grass. So it seems to have that ability to naturally start to source itself. And we're fortunate last year that we didn't get a lot of heavy rains to start washing some of that sediment down into the stream. So a lot will depend on what happens next year too, whether we get bad erosion or whether it's not too bad into it. But as far as officially going in there and planting, I haven't heard of anything that's been discussed. Unless there's something you've heard, Marina.
I haven't heard anything about that either. Agriculture and forestry, we do have some contacts there that we could definitely quiz on it. I know that they are definitely monitoring the recovery of it. And I'm sure that we will hear if they are planning to help the recovery a little bit, or whether they consider it to be adequate the way that it's occurring naturally.
Thank you, Marina. And this question, I believe, would be for Norine or Angie regarding livestock management. Should all cattle be fenced out of streams? Can cattle grazing occur without the use of fencing and still minimize impact to the stream?
I'll jump in first, and Angie, feel free to add. The short answer is yes, but like every land use, it's about how it's managed. And so we do riparian health assessments and inventories, which Angie talked more about. And that's one of the ways we know a site is healthy, and even with grazing, or many other kinds of land uses, it can be healthy. So it's about sort of how you manage the grazing, and probably the most important are making sure that you follow those principles I talked about, particularly off-site watering and not allowing the cattle to make all the choices that they want. And so that's important. And some places though might be too sensitive or might be too complex, and grazing is not going to be suitable. And therefore that's true of other land uses as well. Anything you want to add to that, Angie?
Yeah, I just want to add that you don't always need to fence cattle up. There are other distribution methods as well. Fencing is obviously one of the more extreme ones. It could be most costly, but you can also consider mineral placement up to 300 meters away from the stream, off-site watering system. What was it, 8 or 9 out of 10 cows will choose an off-site watering system versus going in and trudging through mud to get to water. So there's different ways you can get cattle away from the riparian area.
Thank you. I see a question in the chat that I'll grab here. How are all these groups, Trout Unlimited Canada, Cows and Fish, Alberta Environment and Parks, and GWAS, collaborating and interacting with industry, such as logging, oil and gas, to protect and preserve our headwaters, streams, rivers, and bogs? I'll let any one of you jump in.
I can just comment on that. I think for the most part, it's education. So workshops like this, where we invite them to come and learn about the watershed health, riparian health, and all the different aspects of our organizations that you've seen throughout the presentation. And Norine, Marina, Cal, feel free, or Angela, Nicole, feel free to add.
Yeah, definitely. I think from our perspective, meeting up with people on the land has been the most successful part of our work. especially with user groups meeting up on the land and doing hands-on work, made a huge, huge difference. In terms of our collaboration with other groups like Cows and Fish and Trout Unlimited Canada, we do have a lot of meetings, virtual or in person. We talk about all the things that we would like to do on the land in a certain year, and we collaborate on, funding applications and who takes on which job, because we all have specializations, the things that we are really good at, and whether it is knowing certain people that should be involved or getting the right permits in place to do work on the landscape, that's a big, big part of our collaborative work. And there's also an ongoing communication with the Alberta government, whether that's agriculture and forestry or Alberta Environment and Parks. We do have people that we work on a continuous basis with whom we can raise certain concerns, but also discuss projects, whether they fit into the Alberta government's plans, for example. So that's really important part of our work as well. And at the end of the day, it is all supposed to be to the benefit of our headwaters and keeping our watersheds intact, of course.
Can I add to that, Amy? So I think, the other thing that's important, and I think we're continuing to add to this collaboration, is the sort of more large scale and industry partners. And Marina talked about sort of the rough and loose techniques, and some of that has been not only with the local user groups and volunteers, but has also been with the industry organizations, whether it's some of the timber companies, the oil and gas companies, providing heavy equipment, providing resources, helping sort of collaborate on some of the project sites that need restoration as well. And part of that is the Watercourse Crossing app is helping sort of identify priority places. So I think, if we leave any message from tonight, it's that we really need people and organizations and groups from all of those sort of walks of life and users, to work together, because it's a big task.
Yeah, from TUC, I echo everything that everyone else has said, and I will provide like a very specific example, which is in one of our projects in Radiant Creek. The forestry company that works a lot in that area donated a bunch of their wood to us, like the non-merchantable wood, the treetops and stuff that are really perfect for the type of riparian restoration. They just donated it to us. So that's another type of partnership that happens here.
Thank you, Angela. Did anybody else have anything to add? Okay, I have a question here for Angela. Did the arrays show the presence this year of any of the fish that were tagged last year?
Yeah, actually, the very bottom array, which was like the lowest down on the watershed, did show 2 bull trout that we caught last year. So that's like 2 out of 9, which is like, in terms of percentages, not that bad for a return rate. So yeah.
Thank you. And this next question will be for Cal. West of Nordig, burns were done on purpose. Do you feel that your data may reverse this practice?
Could you just repeat that again? I missed the first part.
West of Nordig, there was some burns done on purpose. Do you feel that your data, and I'm assuming the data that you collected in the Ghost, may reverse that practice?
It's a good question. I think there's lots to be learned from fire, and I mean there's wildfire, and then there's prescribed burns, which is probably what's being talked about there. And prescribed burns generally are designed to fit into an area to have the least amount of detrimental impact as possible. So I think where a lot of the information has come from on the impact of wildfires, one of them is the Lost Creek fire down in the Crow's Nest Pass, which was in the early 2000s. And it's been studied extensively to find out what the impacts are. And a lot of the current data that we use comes from that one. But I think without knowing exactly where that burn is, I don't know if it would actually change that practice unless it's found that all fires do. But a lot of it depends on how close they are to waterways and how much potential is for the burnt sediment to flow into the streams. But they should be designed so that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Cal. Marina, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think just to add what Cal said is fire doesn't equal fire. Not all fires are created equal. So that means a prescribed burn is supposed to be very small and not burning very hot. It's supposed to take some of the underbrush rather than taking big trees. So when you have a fire, wildfire that burns really, really hot with a lot of fuel, it can take away all of the soil, and it can release minerals and some other things, pollutants that we really don't want to have in the water. So it's just not necessarily the same when you have a prescribed burn as opposed to having a wildfire.
Thank you, Marina. We have a question here for Norine. What type of maintenance or upkeep is required with off-site watering systems in the wintertime? Do they need to be removed or winterized, or can they remain operational year-round?
Yeah, it totally depends on the kind. A lot of the ones that we work with ranchers are using like off-site watering systems that are portable and solar powered. Generally, those do need to be winterized. So basically, you have to make sure there's no water in them, just like your camper. You wouldn't want the pipes to freeze or the hose to crack. So they need to be drained or tipped upside down if there's a tank, that kind of thing, or kept out where they can't get filled with water and then crack because of the freezing. But there's also free-flowing natural ones that are in say tar troughs that are that don't require that. So it depends on the type. And if you're going to own one, you of course have to know that for your particular type situation.
Thank you. Well, we are at 9 o'clock, so I did want to finish with launching another poll. And I would like to know what the impact of our session today was. So if you could please answer the following 2 questions that have popped up on your screen, I would be incredibly grateful. And while you're taking some time to answer those questions, I'm just going to advance the screen from this beautiful bull trout to a slide to acknowledge funders. Incredible. It looks like 97% of people learned something new today. So I'm very impressed with our presenters. You did an amazing job. And thank you for everybody who tuned in. I do want to ask a final question of the panel while we're here. If people feel inspired, they want to get involved in their watersheds, but they don't know where to start and they might not have any funding, what opportunities might you suggest for finding ways to get involved and finding ways to get funding?
For TUC, we have chapters all over Canada and especially concentrated in Alberta and Ontario. You can visit our website, tucanada.org, I believe, and we have a lot, and our Facebook page or any of our social media channels to find ways to volunteer and get involved in your community.
Yeah, and I'll add Cows and Fish. If you just go to our website and reach out to any one of the specialists, they'll direct you with the grant programs that we have. And I also recommend that you reach out to your local municipality and see what your municipality does in your area, because they also often have lots of different programs as well.
Yeah, for the Ghost Watershed Alliance, if you would like to get involved as a volunteer, please keep an eye on the ghostwatershed.ca website. We do have a news and events page where we advertise volunteer opportunities on a regular basis, and we also keep a mailing list. So if you send us an email, we can put you on that mailing list. We've also collaborated with a lot of individuals and groups over the years to get certain projects funded. And we do have some possibilities as a nonprofit organization to get funding that as an individual you wouldn't necessarily have. So we are always happy to help and collaborate with groups as well as individuals on any projects that you got in mind.
From AP, we work with a lot of different organizations for recovery activities, but I also say as an individual, there are actions like keeping your wheels out of water, clean, drain, dry your gear, keep fish wet when you're handling them, be very careful out there, just respect the landscape, appreciate this beautiful area that we have in our province, and take care of it out there. And that's just something as an individual you can do.
Any final comments from anyone else? All right, well, I will say good night to all of the guests that tuned in. And again, thank you so much to our presenters, and happy Women's Day. Keep pulling the threads, one thread at a time.